House chamber buzzed with an undercurrent of anticipation. It wasn't a vote day, nor a regular policy debate. It was something much bigger. A long-awaited judiciary oversight hearing on government overreach, surveillance abuse, and disinformation tactics orchestrated during the Trump-Russia investigation. The panel included an array of high-profile members, but all eyes were on two men. Senator Adam Schiff, recently elected to the Senate from California and infamous for his role in the now-debunked Russian collusion narrative, and Representative Byron Donalds, the fiery Republican from Florida's 19th District, who had earned a reputation for delivering truth with precision and backbone. As Schiff entered the chamber, his signature smirk in place, cameras flashed and reporters whispered predictions of his masterclass in damage control. But they hadn't counted on Byron Donalds. Byron wasn't there for games or grandstanding. He was there for facts. And facts were something Schiff would soon learn he couldn't spin his way out of. The chair called the hearing to order. "We are convened today," the chairman began, "to determine the extent of disinformation fed to the American public by officials sworn to serve with integrity. This is not about party. This is about truth." Schiff cleared his throat, preparing for his opening remarks. "Let's not pretend this is anything more than political theater," he said condescendingly. "The Trump campaign did indeed have multiple questionable contacts with Russian operatives, and none of which led to a single charge of collusion." Donalds interjected, not waiting for his turn. The room turned silent. Even Schiff blinked. "You'll have your time, Representative," the chairman said sternly, but Donalds simply nodded, already setting the tone. Schiff pressed on, detailing claims he had been repeating for years. But this time, the nation was watching with a new lens, one sharpened by the revelations of biased visa applications, falsified evidence from FBI lawyer Kevin Clinesmith, and the Durham report. When it was finally Byron Donalds' turn, he didn't walk to the mic, he marched. He opened a leather-bound folder, filled with printed emails, transcripts, court documents, and committee memos. "Senator Schiff," he began, voice calm but piercing, "for years, you told the American people you had evidence of collusion, repeatedly, on camera, under oath in hearings. Yet the Mueller report, after $32 million and 2 years, didn't substantiate a single charge of collusion. So I ask you plainly, where is the evidence?" Schiff shifted. "Congressman, you know intelligence matters can't always be." Respectfully, Donalds cut him off. "You didn't say you suspected. You said you had evidence. You said it with certainty, conviction, and the full power of your office. That's not speculation. That's deceit." Gasps echoed from the gallery. Donalds continued, "And while we're at it, let's talk about your use of the Steele dossier. You cited it multiple times in briefings. You treated it like gospel even though it was paid for by the DNC and Hillary Clinton's campaign and riddled with falsehoods." Schiff tried to interject, "The dossier was just one element." "No," Donalds fired back, now visibly passionate. "It was the foundation. And you helped weaponize it to target a sitting president. The FISA court was lied to. American citizens were surveilled. And you stood on CNN and MSNBC nightly feeding lies to the public." The room had grown tense, uncomfortably so. Even Democrat members were no longer smiling. This wasn't a heated debate. This was a methodical dismantling. Donalds pulled out a stack of previously classified documents. "I have here the testimony from Obama-era intelligence officials Comey, Clapper, Brennan, all under oath before this body. You know what they said, Senator? Not one of them had seen direct evidence of Trump-Russia collusion. Not one." Schiff's usual poker face cracked. "And yet," Donalds added, his voice lowered for emphasis, "you told America the opposite. You told them what you wanted them to believe." "Why?" Schiff leaned toward the mic. "Because I believed it was true." Donalds paused, then delivered the final blow of the session. "You didn't act like someone who believed it. You acted like someone who needed it to be true." The chairman banged the gavel, signaling a recess. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Social media exploded. Schiff sat frozen, the once confident smirk erased from his face. And Byron Donalds? He didn't gloat. He didn't grin. He simply returned to his seat and opened another folder. This wasn't over. When the judiciary oversight hearing resumed after the break, the air in the chamber was noticeably different. Gone was the smug confidence Schiff had walked in with. In its place was a stoic silence, as if everyone, including Schiff himself, understood that the tides had shifted. Cameras were rolling. Hashtags like hashtag Donalds versus Schiff, hashtag facts matter, and hashtag the collapse of Schiff were already trending nationwide. Byron Donalds took his seat again at the front table, the stack of documents in front of him now slightly reshuffled. He looked calm, but in the way a storm looks calm before it breaks. The chairman spoke first. Before we move forward, Congressman Donalds has requested additional time to present key exhibits to the committee. We've granted that request. Schiff forced a nod, his hands folded on the desk in front of him. Donalds adjusted his mic and said, "Ladies and gentlemen of this committee, and to the American people watching, let's be crystal clear, this isn't about relitigating the past for political points. This is about accountability." He held up a binder with the Department of Justice seal on it. This is the Office of the Inspector General's report, Michael Horowitz's findings. Page 256, quote, "We identified significant inaccuracies and omissions in each of the 4 FISA applications." He flipped through the pages, eye scanning. In total, 17 inaccuracies or omissions. 17, including failure to disclose that the Steele dossier was unverified and politically funded. And who pushed that dossier into the mainstream despite being told it was bunk? He paused. Senator Adam Schiff. The room was silent except for the sound of Byron's pages turning. "Let's talk about Carter Page," Donalds continued, "a U.S. citizen falsely accused, illegally surveilled, and dragged through the mud, all based on lies. And Senator Schiff, in your infamous 2018 memo, you insisted that the FISA court's decision to grant the surveillance was not based on political bias. That memo is now discredited. The Inspector General said so himself." He looked directly at Schiff. "Do you want to amend that statement today?" Schiff, visibly tense, leaned forward. "I stand by my memo at the time. We were operating on information available then." Donalds didn't even blink. "Senator, the FBI had already been warned that the Steele dossier might be Russian disinformation. That was before your memo. You knew or should have known that it was unreliable." A few murmurs rippled through the chamber. Then came the bombshell. Donalds reached into a red folder and pulled out a never-before-seen transcript from a closed-door committee hearing, recently declassified. "Let's read a portion from your own interview with the House Intelligence Committee in 2017, Donalds said, quoting directly. "I do not recall seeing any direct evidence of collusion between President Trump and the Russian government." Your words. He held the transcript up. "And yet, less than 48 hours later, you appeared on MSNBC saying the exact opposite. Do you deny this contradiction?" Schiff squirmed. "That quote is taken out of context." "No, sir," Donalds snapped. "It's the full context. And this document proves you were telling 2 different stories, one behind closed doors under oath and another to the public on cable news." By now, even some Democrat committee members were no longer making eye contact with Schiff. Donalds leaned into the mic again. "Let's be real. You didn't just mislead America. You helped divide the country. You fueled years of mistrust. You wasted tens of millions in taxpayer dollars. And worst of all, you silenced anyone who dared question you by calling them traitors, Russian assets, or conspiracy theorists." He held up another paper. "This is a letter signed by dozens of former intelligence officials suggesting the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation, a letter that you publicly endorsed. It turned out to be real. And once again, you were wrong." Schiff tried to speak, but Donalds raised his hand. "I'm not done." He took a breath. "This pattern of deception is not isolated. It's habitual. It's systemic. And it's why so many Americans no longer trust Congress, no longer trust intelligence agencies, no longer trust our institutions. Because people in power like you have abused that power to manipulate public opinion." The silence was heavy. Byron concluded, "This isn't about revenge, Senator. It's about restoring integrity. And that begins by telling the truth even if it's decades too late." The gavel pounded. The chairman's voice sounded almost reverent. "Recess granted. We'll resume tomorrow for closing remarks." As everyone stood, Schiff remained seated, stunned, staring into the abyss of his own legacy unraveling. And Byron Donalds? He gathered his papers, calmly stood, and exited the chamber, not with a smirk, not with arrogance, but with the quiet confidence of a man who just told the truth and let the facts do the destroying. By the following morning, the story had exploded. Mainstream networks were scrambling. What had started as a routine oversight hearing had morphed into the most watched congressional confrontation in years. And the American people? They were glued to every second. Clips of Byron Donalds' testimony had gone viral. Millions watched the exact moment when Schiff's 2017 private admission, "I do not recall seeing any direct evidence of collusion," was played against his public narrative. Side-by-side videos flooded social media with captions like "Liar exposed, receipts don't lie," and "Byron brought the heat." On the cable news circuit, the divide was stark. CNN's morning panel looked visibly rattled. "We're reviewing the transcripts again, but there are definitely discrepancies," said one host, clearly struggling to justify Schiff's statements. MSNBC's panel was in damage control mode. "This is an orchestrated hit job," one commentator insisted, clearly timed for maximum political impact. But we must remember, Adam Schiff has long been a patriot in the fight against authoritarianism. But the real drama was playing out outside of the studios. In diners across the Midwest, in barbershops in Georgia, on construction sites in Arizona, Americans were asking the same question: wait, how long did he lie to us? Even lifelong Democrats were starting to question everything. One viral TikTok showed a middle-aged woman with a Biden-Harris bumper sticker on her minivan shaking her head. "I defended Schiff for years," she said. "Now I feel like a fool." Byron Donalds just laid it all out. No yelling, no drama, just facts. And you can't argue with facts. On Capitol Hill, Schiff's allies were trying to regroup. Behind closed doors, the Democratic leadership was panicking, not over one bad hearing, but over the narrative shift that was now spiraling out of their control. The concern wasn't just Schiff's credibility, it was the ripple effect. If Americans started re-examining everything they'd been told for the last 8 years, what else would unravel? Meanwhile, Byron Donalds was anything but rattled. He appeared on Fox News that evening, sitting comfortably across from Tucker Carlson. "Congressman Donalds," Tucker said, "what you did yesterday wasn't just bold, it was meticulous. Where did you get all that material?" Byron smiled. "Well, Tucker, I did what Schiff never did. I read the reports. I followed the evidence. And I waited. Because sooner or later, the truth always finds a spotlight." Tucker leaned in. "And what do you say to critics who claim this was all political?" Byron didn't hesitate. "I say it's more political to spend 4 years lying to the American people just to hurt a sitting president you didn't like. That's not patriotism, that's propaganda. And the people who push that narrative have to be held accountable, period." By the time the interview ended, donations to Byron's re-election campaign were pouring in. Grassroots groups started launching petitions demanding Schiff be censured or at the very least investigated for misleading Congress and the public. And then came the most unexpected twist of all. A former FBI analyst, previously silent, stepped forward. Her name was Samantha Granger, and she had worked directly under the Crossfire Hurricane Task Force. She posted a video on X, formerly Twitter. "Byron Donalds was right. We warned certain members of Congress, including Senator Schiff, that the Steele dossier had serious credibility issues. We flagged it. We flagged sources. And yet the narrative kept being pushed. I'm done staying silent." Her video received 11 million views in less than 12 hours. At that point, there was no putting the toothpaste back in the tube. The illusion had cracked and the backlash was only beginning. Meanwhile, Schiff? He issued a brief statement late at night. "The congressman is twisting the record to suit his own political goals. I remain proud of my work to defend American democracy from foreign influence. This is nothing but an attempt to deflect from real threats." But no one was buying it anymore. Polls released the next morning showed Schiff's approval rating in California had dropped 17 points overnight. Meanwhile, Byron Donalds was now being mentioned alongside the likes of Ron DeSantis and Kristi Noem as a rising star in the GOP and a potential future presidential candidate. In just 24 hours, the entire narrative had flipped. And the man who made it happen? He was just getting started. Washington, D.C. was in a full-blown tailspin. By the third day after Byron Donalds' explosive takedown of Senator Adam Schiff, the reverberations could be felt far beyond the Capitol. It wasn't just political theater anymore, there were real consequences being discussed in real time. In private Democrat strategy sessions, the panic was palpable. Schiff's inner circle was scrambling to control the damage. Leaked memos showed advisors urging him to apologize for errors in judgment or at least express regret for the tone of past statements. But Schiff refused. "I will not be bullied into walking back what I know to be true," he reportedly said behind closed doors. But the truth was that position was becoming less and less defensible by the hour. Republicans, galvanized by Donald's precision and composure, wasted no time. Within 48 hours, a group of 17 GOP lawmakers had co-signed a resolution led by Representative Jim Jordan calling for a formal ethics investigation into Schiff's conduct during his time as chair of the House Intelligence Committee. The resolution stated, The record demonstrates a pattern of knowingly misleading the public, misrepresenting classified material, and leveraging official capacity to promote disinformation under the guise of national security. The words were harsh, but the evidence backing them up was devastating. More emails surfaced, internal communications from Schiff's former staffers showing a deliberate effort to leak select parts of classified testimony while withholding exculpatory evidence that undermined the Trump-Russia collusion narrative. Worse, one email showed Schiff's office coordinating with media outlets to time releases for maximum impact. Suddenly, what had been dismissed for years as conservative conspiracy was now undeniable. On the Senate side, even some moderate Democrats were beginning to distance themselves. Senator Joe Manchin told a local reporter, "Look, if someone's lying to the American people intentionally, that's a serious problem no matter which party they're from." Even Chuck Schumer's office released a vague but telling statement, "Every senator must be accountable to the facts. We will evaluate all relevant developments thoroughly." But for Byron Donalds, this wasn't about political scalps, it was about restoring the public's trust. Speaking at a town hall in Naples, Florida, packed wall-to-wall with energized constituents, Donalds laid out what came next. "We need a full review, not just of what Schiff said or didn't say, but how our intelligence institutions were used as weapons in a political war. We cannot let D.C. become a place where truth is optional and accountability is dead." He was met with thunderous applause. But perhaps the most dramatic moment came when Donalds addressed Schiff directly again, this time through an open letter published in the Wall Street Journal. "Senator Schiff, you've made a career out of acting as though truth is subjective, as if your version of reality is somehow more sacred than the facts. But facts don't belong to parties. They belong to the people. And the people deserve better." Cable news and online outlets dissected every line of the letter, but one thing was universally agreed upon: this wasn't going away. Then came a surprise no one expected. A whistleblower inside the Department of Justice came forward, confirming that there had been internal discussions years earlier about whether to censure Schiff over his handling of classified information and press coordination during the Mueller investigation. It was now abundantly clear the Schiff narrative was collapsing not because of a political vendetta but because too many insiders had finally had enough of the charade. In a moment of poetic irony, Schiff found himself on the defensive in every single interview. What once were softball appearances turned into grilling sessions. On Face the Nation, the host confronted him bluntly. "Senator Schiff, why did you continue to push a narrative that you privately admitted you couldn't prove?" He fumbled, tried to pivot, but it was too late. The public had made up its mind. Meanwhile, conservative podcasts, radio shows, and influencers were calling Byron Donalds a truth warrior, a congressman with a spine, and even, somewhat jokingly, the man who made Schiff short-circuit on national TV. Merchandise began appearing online with Donald's face beside bold block letters, "Facts over fear." The establishment media could barely keep up. Even international news outlets were now running the story, portraying it as a David versus Goliath tale of a Florida congressman exposing one of Washington's most media-savvy veterans. But Donalds wasn't reveling in the attention. In a private meeting with House GOP leadership, he pushed for legislation that would implement tighter standards on how intelligence committees release information to the public, preventing any future Schiff-style narrative crafting. The proposed bill was called the Transparency and Truth Act. The message was clear: this wasn't just about punishment. It was about permanent change. And as the week ended, the fallout was only just beginning. 2 weeks after Byron Donalds' now historic dismantling of Senator Adam Schiff, the political landscape in Washington and across the country had changed dramatically. What had begun as a high-profile clash during a House oversight hearing had evolved into something far more significant: a reckoning. Schiff's empire of influence was crumbling. The once unquestioned media darling, who had been lionized for years as a defender of democracy, was now the subject of late-night ridicule and online memes. Once sympathetic journalists now struggled to justify his contradictions. Polls showed that nearly 62% of Americans believed Schiff had deliberately misled the public during the Trump-Russia probe. Among independents, that number soared to 71%. A bipartisan ethics committee, under mounting public pressure, had no choice but to open a formal investigation into Schiff's past conduct. Though he continued to deny wrongdoing, the investigation itself was damning, reopening wounds the Democratic establishment had hoped were long buried. Meanwhile, Byron Donalds' star was rising faster than anyone expected. Invitations to speak flooded in from across the nation. He addressed think tanks in D.C., town halls in Pennsylvania, high school civics classes in Arizona, and even a law school symposium at Stanford titled Truth, Transparency, and the Role of the Modern Statesman. In each speech, he stayed on message. This isn't about Adam Schiff. This is about what happens when the truth is no longer the foundation of our republic. It's about restoring the integrity of our institutions, not for one party, but for all Americans. Media outlets began calling him the new face of accountability. Even some disaffected centrists started saying he's not just a Republican, he's a reformer. But more than the headlines or interviews, what truly cemented Donald's legacy was what he did next. He pushed the Transparency and Truth Act to the House floor. The proposed legislation was bold. It required independent audits of all major intelligence-based claims made by members of Congress, public disclosure timelines for declassified documents related to investigations that impact national elections, severe penalties for elected officials who knowingly misrepresent intelligence findings in public statements. Despite fierce resistance from some lawmakers on both sides who feared opening Pandora's box, the American public overwhelmingly supported it. Petitions gained millions of signatures. Grassroots organizations mobilized. Constituents flooded Capitol Hill with phone calls demanding support for the bill. In a narrow but symbolic victory, the bill passed the House with a 219 to 213 vote. The Senate remained a battleground, but the message was clear. Americans were done with the lies, spin, and political theater that had defined so much of the last decade. And Schiff? Once seen as a potential future attorney general or even a dark horse presidential candidate, he was now fighting for his political life. Primary challengers emerged in California, emboldened by his plummeting approval ratings. His donors grew silent. Fundraising dried up. Even within the Democratic Party, whispers of cutting him loose began to circulate. He's a liability now, one anonymous strategist told Politico. We can't keep defending this. In a final, desperate attempt to salvage his legacy, Schiff appeared on a primetime CNN special titled The Fight for Truth. But instead of defending his past actions with clarity, he deflected, dodged, and tried to pivot back to Trump. The public wasn't buying it anymore. Comment sections exploded. Byron showed the facts. Schiff showed excuses. No more gaslighting. We see it now. It took one man with a backbone to speak truth to power. The cultural tide had shifted. Byron Donalds' rise had also re-energized a new generation of political leaders, young, unafraid, data-driven, and unapologetically transparent. They were Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And they all cited one moment as their inspiration. The day Byron Donalds dropped the truth hammer on Adam Schiff. Books were already being written about it. Podcasts titled Schiff's Collapse hit the top of the charts. Conservative influencers hailed it as a defining turning point in modern American politics. But for Byron Donalds, it wasn't about fame. One quiet evening, as he left a late committee meeting, a Capitol janitor, a Vietnam veteran named Harold, stopped him in the hallway. "Sir," he said, "I've cleaned these halls since the 80s. I've seen politicians come and go. But what you did, that was different. You didn't just speak. You told the truth. We've needed that for a long time." Donald smiled, shook his hand, and replied, "It's the least we owe the American people." As he walked into the cool D.C. night, the Capitol behind him glowing in silence, Byron Donalds knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning.